welcome to the deep dive. And before we even really get rolling today,
Yeah, we have a massive amount of ground to cover.
we really do. But first, I want to ask you to do us a huge favor. Please take a second, like right now, to like and subscribe to the show.
It really helps us out.
Exactly, and it ensures you never miss out on these really extensive breakdowns. So today, we are undertaking a pretty massive, comprehensive exploration of a highly polarizing new ebook.
Published in 2025.
Right, 2025. And it is titled Feminist Madness, Zombie Cancer on Truth.
Quite idle.
Yeah, written by Conrad Riker. And right out of the gate, we need to acknowledge exactly who this book is for.
He doesn't hide it.
No, not at all. Riker states explicitly in his preface that this is not for the faint-hearted. It is laser-targeted at a very specific demographic.
The men's rights activist community.
The MRA community, exactly. And, red-pilled, manosphere, men.
So the core mission of this deep dive is to really unpack the author's intense perspective on how Western institutions were, in his view, completely captured by a fusion of feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Right. We're basically looking at this text as a cultural artifact.
A window into a very distinct, very intense worldview.
Because it's a worldview that has gained significant traction in certain corners of the culture.
We are going to examine the architecture of Riker's arguments, how he connects historical philosophy to modern culture wars, and what that tells us about this specific demographic's deep distrust of modern society.
But because of the nature of this text, we need to set some ground rules with you, the listener, before we jump into the deep end here.
Very important.
The source material today contains highly politically charged right-wing content. We want to make it absolutely clear that we are not taking sides, nor are we endorsing the viewpoints or claims made in this book.
Right.
Our job is simply to impartially report on the content provided and help you understand the ideas and arguments contained within the original source material.
Because to truly grasp the broader cultural landscape, you have to understand the frameworks that different groups are using to make sense of the world.
Exactly.
That requires looking closely at the mechanics of their arguments, regardless of whether you personally align with those frameworks.
So if you are intrigued by this exploration as we go along and you want to read the book for yourself to see exactly how the author constructs these arguments, you should definitely check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook.
It is a dense, provocative read.
Highly provocative. And we are going to break down its core pillars today. So, the hook here, the overarching claim that drives the entire narrative, is Riker's assertion that the decline of Western civilization isn't happening through, say, armed invasion.
Or economic collapse.
Right, or traditional warfare. Instead, he claims it is happening through a deliberate weaponization of female biology, what he calls toxic empathy, and Marxist word games.
It's a sweeping, multidisciplinary claim. He is attempting to merge evolutionary psychology, political science, and cultural critique into one grand unified theory of civilizational collapse.
He isn't just saying policies have shifted left-right.
No. He is arguing that our institutions have been psychologically and biologically hijacked. And to understand how he builds this case, we have to look at the historical timeline he constructs.
Where does he start?
He traces the origins of this alleged institutional rot straight back to the mid-20th century, specifically targeting the Frankfurt School of Marxism.
Yeah, I was looking through his chapters on the historical origins, and he spends a massive amount of time on a philosopher named Herbert Marcuse.
He really zeroes in on him.
Riker argues that modern woke culture isn't some new phenomenon that just sprang up on college campuses over the last decade. He sees it as a direct descendant, like a calculated evolution of Frankfurt School theories.
Yes, and pointing very specifically to Marcuse's 1965 essay.
The one on repressive tolerance, right? Can you walk us through what that concept actually is and how Riker is applying it?
Sure. So Marcuse is a central figure in this historical timeline, and that 1965 essay is the linchpin of Riker's argument regarding modern censorship.
Okay.
For those unfamiliar, Marcuse wrote during a time of massive social upheaval. He argued that in a society with vast inequalities of power, the traditional liberal concept of tolerance, where you just let everyone speak freely and let the best ideas win, actually favors the powerful and maintains the status quo.
So it's a critique of classic liberalism.
Exactly. Therefore, Marcuse proposed repressive tolerance. This is the idea that true tolerance might actually require intolerance toward oppressive, right-wing, or conservative ideas.
While demanding absolute tolerance for left-wing ideas.
For left-wing revolutionary ideas, yes. Marcuse essentially believed that giving equal airtime to regressive ideas only perpetuated systemic harm against marginalized groups.
And Riker takes that 1965 concept and maps it perfectly onto the modern day.
One-to-one mapping.
He argues that this essay is the literal step-by-step playbook for today's cancel culture. He claims this is exactly why you see university campuses demanding safe spaces and absolute tolerance for progressive ideas.
But simultaneously shutting down or physically protesting conservative speakers.
Right, and labeling their speech not just as disagreeable, but as hate speech or literal violence. Riker calls this tactic cultural napalm.
Cultural napalm. Because by framing opposing speech as literal violence, it justifies a physical or institutional response to shut it down.
It changes the rules of engagement.
Exactly. Riker argues that this isn't hypocrisy on the part of the modern left. It is the exact intended application of Marcuse's theory.
But what is truly striking about Riker's methodology here is how he links this mid-century academic theory to the modern corporate HR department.
He bridges that gap very aggressively.
He claims that modern DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are not about fairness at all. He actually calls them Marxist software updates.
The way he describes this software update is fascinating. He argues that the original Marxist framework, which relied on the economic struggle between the working class proletariat and the wealthy bourgeoisie, completely failed to take root in the prosperous West.
Because life got too good.
Right. The working class in America and Europe got comfortable. They bought houses, they got cars. They didn't want a violent revolution.
So the ideology had to adapt.
According to Riker, the ideology had to mutate to survive. It swamped out economic class struggle for identity struggle.
He literally writes that the architects of modern institutions just took the Marxist texts, hit find and replace, and swapped the word proletariat with BIPOC or other marginalized identities.
Which fundamentally changes the battlefield.
How so?
If the struggle is economic, you fight it with unions and tax policy. But if the struggle is rooted in immutable traits like race, gender, or sexual orientation, the battle becomes cultural.
It becomes psychological and institutional.
Yes. Riker is arguing that the institutions have been captured by an ideology that inherently demands the perpetual suppression of traditional Western masculine values in order to achieve this new version of equity.
But he doesn't just stop at Marxism. That is just the first layer of his unified theory.
He merges it with biology.
Right. He merges this political theory with biology, leading to one of his most original and frankly most jarring theories.
The biological aspect is central to his whole book.
He introduces these concepts he calls estrogen collectivism and womb communism. When I first read those terms, I had to pause. They are incredibly provocative.
Highly provocative labels.
How exactly is he taking a biological hormone and translating it into a sweeping political theory?
The premise relies on deeply entrenched evolutionary psychology. Riker argues that female biological traits, specifically the evolutionary maternal instinct to protect, nurture, and coddle offspring, have been detached from the localized family unit.
And turned into what?
Twisted into a malignant, overarching political force. He is essentially pathologizing empathy when it is applied at a state or institutional level.
Pathologizing empathy, that's a heavy concept.
He argues that a mother's instinct is to ensure all her children survive, regardless of their individual capabilities. And doing that requires a redistribution of resources from the strongest child to the weakest.
Okay, and he uses this incredible dark analogy of the terrible mother.
Yes, the terrible mother archetype.
He claims that leftist policy acts exactly like a deranged, overprotective mother figure. This terrible mother infantilizes her citizens, treating them like dependent infants who constantly need safe spaces, trigger warnings, and what he calls equity blankets.
Equity blankets.
But simultaneously, this mother figure harshly punishes the independent, productive citizens who he characterizes as male predators or providers through heavy taxation and social shaming.
The goal, in his view, is to fund the endless coddling of the infants.
It is a complete psychological reframing of the entire welfare state and all social justice initiatives.
Instead of viewing these policies as well-intentioned attempts at societal fairness or a social safety net, he views them as an unchecked, misapplied biological imperative.
He brings in some actual science to try to back this up.
He does.
Yeah.
He cites researchers who have studied sex differences in empathy, like Simon Baron-Cohen's work on the empathizing systemizing theory.
But Riker weaponizes that data.
He absolutely weaponizes it. He claims this natural maternal wiring mutates into pathological altruism when it drives government policy. The state, in his view, ceases to be an arbiter of justice and instead becomes a giant, smothering nursery.
The anecdotes he pulls to back up this nursery analogy are just wild. I mean, the contrast he highlights is jarring.
He's very good at finding these extreme examples.
He cites instances of what he explicitly calls adults treated like teething infants. For example, he points to UC Berkeley allegedly spending $300,000 on stress relief puppies for students during midterms.
$300,000 on puppies.
You could fund an entire academic department with that budget. He contrasts that immense spending on emotional coddling with their $45,000 a year tuition.
The optics are exactly what he's going for.
He also mentions Brown University supposedly installing $300,000 crypods equipped with beanbags and coloring books after the 2016 election.
For Riker, those aren't just funny news blurbs.
No, they're proof of his theory.
They are symptoms of civilizational regression. He argues that a healthy mother prepares her children for the dangers of the jungle. But these institutional woke mommies demand that the entire jungle gets carpeted so nobody ever scrapes a knee.
Carpet the jungle versus preparing for it. That framing is absolutely central to his worldview.
It perfectly encapsulates the MRA perspective that modern society has lost its edge and its resilience.
He's arguing we have completely abandoned the traditional masculine approach of stoicism, risk-taking, and hard knocks preparation.
In favor of a hyper-feminized therapeutic approach to every minor adversity.
So if Riker believes these biological imperatives, like maternal coddling, are so deeply ingrained and have fundamentally altered our institutions, how does he explain the impact this has on men specifically?
What happens to masculinity in a society that he claims is being entirely feminized?
Exactly.
This leads directly into his thesis on feminist biology warfare.
Feminist biology warfare.
Riker asserts that masculinity is under a full-scale, deliberate biological and psychological assault. He believes there is a calculated effort to pathologize male excellence and the very core of male biology.
And the prime example he uses to illustrate this is the popularization of the term toxic masculinity.
He is incredibly aggressive on this point.
Riker asserts that toxic masculinity is not a clinical psychological fact. He points out it has never been in the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for Psychology.
Right.
Instead, he calls it a verbal shiv. I find that phrasing really telling. What does he mean by a verbal shiv?
Well, a shiv is an improvised weapon usually made in a prison.
Right, a prison shank.
Yeah. By calling it a verbal shiv, Riker is implying it was a weapon crafted in captivity. Specifically, he argues, in modern gender studies departments, with the sole intent of wounding the dominant culture.
He traces the ideological roots of the term back to radical feminist and Marxist academics in the 1980s.
Like Andrea Dworkin.
Claiming the intent was always to cripple male biological dominance. By attaching the word toxic directly to masculinity, Riker argues they are engaging in Orwellian newspeak.
He says they aren't trying to fix bad behavior like violence or bullying.
Right.
They're trying to eliminate the very concept of healthy, assertive male power. They are making the traits that literally built civilization, stoicism, aggression, competitiveness, the drive to conquer synonymous with a disease that needs to be cured.
And he juxtaposes this societal shaming of men with some incredibly grim statistics to highlight what he sees as a profound hypocrisy.
He looks at who's actually doing the dying in our society.
The numbers he brings up are stark. He cites CDC data showing that men die by suicide 3.88 times more often than women.
Almost 4 times as often.
He points out that male workplace deaths in highly dangerous foundational fields like mining, firefighting, high voltage line repair, and waste management make up 94% of all workplace fatalities.
94%.
Yet, he says, academia and modern culture completely ignore this sacrifice and this massive suffering. Instead, the institutions lecture these very same men about their inherent privilege and treat their traditional stoicism as a pathology.
It creates a narrative of profound betrayal. Riker is speaking directly to men who feel they are doing the dangerous, dirty, physically grueling work required to keep society functioning.
Keeping the lights on, the water running, the bridges standing.
Only to be vilified by the very cultural institutions they are sustaining.
But he doesn't limit this concept of feminist warfare to language or workplace dynamics.
No, he takes it straight into the most visceral realm possible.
Dating, mating, and reproduction.
This is where the book crosses into some truly controversial territory regarding evolutionary psychology and modern dating.
He introduces this concept of mate suppression and hypergamy, and he leans on something he calls the shrimp theory.
The shrimp theory.
I was reading through the dating app data he uses to support this, And it is fascinating how he twists standard tech data into an evolutionary panic. Can you walk us through what he means by the shrimp theory?
Sure. The shrimp theory is Riker's highly memorable branding of a very common manosphere talking point regarding hypergamy.
Hypergamy being the tendency for females to seek mates of higher status.
Exactly, or greater resources than themselves.
That's right.
Riker takes this biological concept and applies it to the hyper-accelerated environment of modern dating apps like Tinder.
Right. He cites Tinder data claiming that the top 10% of men on the platform are hoarding 90% of the matches.
Which completely shifts the mating dynamic. In a localized tribe of 50 people thousands of years ago, a woman would pick the best hunter available.
But on a global digital network, she has access to millions of men.
Riker claims women's hypergamous instincts go into overdrive, leading them to completely ignore the vast majority of perfectly average, capable men.
They spend their prime reproductive years chasing the top-tier men, the alpha crustaceans, as he puts it.
While the rest of the average men, the shrimp, simply sink to the bottom of the dating pool.
Completely invisible and discarded.
He is arguing that technology has broken the traditional monogamous social contract, creating an entire generation of sexless, discarded men who have zero stake in the future of society.
And if a massive percentage of young men have no hope of ever finding a partner or starting a family, Riker warns that historically, that is exactly when societies experience massive spikes in violence and instability.
But he connects this localized dating app dynamic to a much larger and far more provocative institutional critique.
This is complete reframing of abortion.
Yes,
Let's pause and unpack this because it is one of the most intense claims in the entire book.
it really is.
In Riker's framework, abortion is not a medical procedure. It is not about bodily autonomy, healthcare, or reproductive rights.
He strips all of that away.
He takes a World Health Organization statistic, 73 million global abortions occurring annually, and reframes it entirely.
He calls it industrial scale meat suppression.
And Lysistrata with scalpels. How does he justify making that massive leap from a global healthcare metric to a Darwinian economic game?
It requires looking at reproduction purely as an evolutionary arms race.
Okay.
Lysistrata, for context, is an ancient Greek comedy where women withhold sex to force men to end the Peloponnesian War.
Right.
Riker is using the term to imply a coordinated biological strike against men. His argument is that modern women are using abortion as a post-conception tool to weed out the offspring of beta males.
Wow.
If a woman accidentally gets pregnant by an average man, Riker claims she aborts it so she can remain unburdened and physically available to continue chasing the genetics and resources of the alpha males.
He backs this up by citing data from the Guttmacher Institute and Planned Parenthood,
He uses their own data against the standard narrative.
claiming that the vast majority of abortions are explicitly for social reasons, financial stress, or timing convenience, rather than medical necessity or trauma.
He views this as a deliberate eugenic strategy.
It's a way for the matriarchy to exert total, ruthless control over the gene pool.
While simultaneously forcing the state, and by extension the male taxpayers, to legally protect and financially subsidize their reproductive selectivity.
It is a deeply cynical, purely transactional view of reproductive freedom.
He completely removes any agency, moral wrestling, or emotional complexity from the woman's decision-making process.
He reduces the entire human experience of reproduction to cold biological algorithms of mate selection and status hoarding.
And what's crucial to understand is how he extends this idea of female evolutionary behavior beyond dating and into the workplace and the digital public square.
He argues that the physical violence historically used by men to dominate hierarchies has simply been replaced.
By the psychological and social violence historically used by women.
He frames this as gossip, as industrial warfare.
He brings up the specific research from UCLA regarding neurochemistry.
The study claims that female brains light up during gossip in the exact same neurological pathways that male brains light up during sex.
Whether you buy that one-to-one neurological comparison or not, his broader point is that women are biologically hardwired for relational aggression.
Instead of punching an opponent in the face, relational aggression is about destroying reputations
Freezing people out of the social group.
and utilizing emotional manipulation to destroy an enemy's standing in the community.
And he claims that this inherent biological tendency has now been formalized and codified into institutional HR policy.
This is how he explains the phenomenon of cancel culture.
For Riker, cancel culture isn't a grassroots movement for accountability or social justice.
It is the weaponization of female relational aggression, scaled up by global digital networks, and fully endorsed by the institutions.
He points to a very specific case study.
The shitty media men list. This was a crowdsourced, anonymous Google spreadsheet created in 2017 by a journalist named Moira Donegan,
It was circulated privately among women in the media industry.
allowing them to anonymously accuse male colleagues of various forms of misconduct, ranging from creepy comments to outright assault.
Riker calls this a digital Salem.
He emphasizes that it operated on zero evidence, zero due process, and zero ability for the accused to face their accuser.
It was pure anonymous hearsay.
Yet, the moment the list leaked, it destroyed careers instantly.
He argues this is the inevitable result when you let the matriarchy run human resources in public discourse.
The traditional masculine systems of justice evidence, cross-examination, innocent until proven guilty are discarded.
In their place, accusations alone replace evidence, and gossip becomes a lethal industrial weapon used to purge ideological enemies and non-compliant males from the workplace.
It's a total inversion of the traditional feminist argument.
It is. Feminists have argued for decades that our institutions are inherently patriarchal and designed to protect men.
Riker is looking at the exact same institutions, looking at the tactics they use: cancellation, deplatforming, anonymous HR complaints, prioritizing feelings over due process, and saying, no, look at the methodology.
Institutions aren't patriarchal at all. They're entirely matriarchal.
Exactly, and that inversion is the theoretical bridge that takes us from the biological arguments directly into the practical, real-world consequences he sees in our society.
Because if these biological imperatives have truly captured the system, what does the output of that system look like?
This brings us to the massive section of the book dedicated to detailing the real-world fallout in education and corporate America.
He calls the modern public school system's education gulags.
He asserts that when a civilization actively decides to trade hard, objective facts for subjective feelings, specifically to avoid making anyone feel marginalized or academically inferior, that civilization is actively choosing to collapse.
He believes the entire modern equity movement in education is fundamentally anti-intellectual and deeply anti-meritocratic.
Let's break down the logic behind equitable grading, because it is central to his panic.
The pedagogical theory behind equitable grading is that traditional grading scales, penalizing late work, giving zeros for missed assignments, disproportionately harm students from unstable homes or marginalized backgrounds.
So, equity initiatives attempt to measure only the mastery of the subject, removing penalties for behavior, attendance, or timeliness.
Riker, however, views this not as a compassionate leveling of the playing field, but as academic euthanasia.
Academic euthanasia.
By lowering the standards to ensure equal outcomes, which is how he defines equity, he argues you are intentionally destroying competence.
He provides some staggering specific example to illustrate this destruction of competence.
He goes after the big school districts.
He points to Portland public schools, claiming they actually declared traditional math instruction racist because demanding singular correct answers upholds white supremacy culture.
The result he cites.
A subsequent 61% failure rate in state math standards.
He looks at Baltimore, where he claims the implementation of equitable grading, meaning no deadlines, no penalties for cheating, and giving students 50% credit just for handing in a blank piece of paper, resulted in 23 separate schools having 0 students proficient in math.
Not one student.
He even takes aim at the Ivy League.
Citing a Yale decolonized math course that allegedly claims the equation 2 + 2 = 5 is a valid form of indigenous knowledge, while objective calculus is colonial oppression.
He is incredibly keen to point out that this institutional incompetence doesn't just stay contained within the classroom.
Right. It eventually graduates, gets a job, and bleeds out into the real world with catastrophic physical consequences.
The real-world implications he draws are terrifying if true.
He links this lowering of academic standards directly to the failure of physical infrastructure.
He sends a highly controversial claim from the National Council of Examiners.
Linking a 2023 bridge collapse in Montana directly to lowered engineering standards pushed by a university's equity compliance office.
The claim Riker repeats is that the university banned failing grades in advanced engineering courses to prevent systemic harm to marginalized students.
As a result, unqualified engineers passed their exams, got jobs at structural firms, and designed a bridge that collapsed under its own weight.
For Riker, this bridge collapse is the ultimate undeniable metaphor for his entire book.
Reality simply does not care about your feelings.
Gravity does not care about your pronouns or your diversity quotas.
When a society replaces rigorous merit with ideological equity, the literal bridges fall down.
It is a highly potent narrative for his audience. The idea that progressive ideology isn't just annoying or misguided.
It is literal social arson that is structurally compromising the physical safety of the nation.
He extends this concept of ideological sabotage straight into the corporate boardroom.
In a chapter he titles Corporate Betrayal and Equity Theft.
That phrase, equity theft, is incredibly strong.
He defines modern corporate equity policies not as an attempt to level the playing field, but as Marxist redistribution disguised as social justice.
He says equity policies disguise redistribution as justice, robbing Peter to pay Paul, then charging Peter double for the privilege.
It's the MRA belief that hardworking, highly productive individuals are being financially penalized and passed over for promotions in order to subsidize the unproductive.
But the corporate betrayal aspect is where he really leans into the financial data.
He gloats over the massive financial damage companies have suffered by embracing what he calls woke policies.
He frames these corporate initiatives like ESG scores, DEI quotas, and elaborate Pride Month campaigns, not as savvy marketing or ethical business practices.
He frames them as corporate seppuku, a ritual suicide performed to appease the Rainbow Inquisition.
The financial casualties he lists are astronomical.
He cites Disney allegedly losing $10 billion at the box office because, in his view, they prioritized LGBT propaganda and strict inclusion standards over foundational storytelling.
Pointing specifically to the financial failure of the movie Lightyear.
He highlights Target losing $15 billion in market value in a matter of weeks after pushing tuck-friendly Pride swimsuits for minors.
Which triggered massive nationwide boycotts.
And, of course, the granddaddy of all corporate blunders, the Bud Light partnership with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney.
Riker claims that single marketing stunt cost Anheuser-Busch $27 billion in market cap and permanently destroyed their core consumer base.
Why does Riker think corporations are doing this if it mathematically loses them billions of dollars?
This is where his theory gets complex. He views these losses as proof that the Marxist feminist institutional capture is fundamentally anti-capitalist and self-destructive.
He points back to the Frankfurt School's critical theory playbook,
arguing that corporations have been ideologically captured from the inside by HR departments filled with gender studies graduates.
Or, alternatively, he argues they are being financially coerced from the outside by massive investment firms like BlackRock,
who use ESG scores to threaten a company's access to capital if they don't prioritize progressive ideology over raw profit.
It's a fascinating inversion of the traditional leftist critique of corporations.
Historically, the left hates corporations for being greedy, ruthless, profit-maximizing machines.
Here, the right-wing author is furious at corporations not for being capitalists, but for completely abandoning capitalism to become social justice enforcers.
Exactly. And to understand how this ideological capture happens on an individual level, we have to transition into the psychological profile Riker builds of the people running these institutions.
He doesn't merely think his political opponents have flawed economic theories or different moral priorities.
No, he believes they're fundamentally, clinically unwell.
Riker is absolutely relentless on this point. He explicitly claims that the far left is suffering from a literal epidemic of untreated mental illness.
And that their political ideology is just a public manifestation of psychiatric pathology.
He calls it the woke mind virus.
This strategy, the medicalization and pathologization of your political enemies, is increasingly common in hyperpolarized discourse.
Because it removes the need to debate the merit of their ideas.
Exactly. You classify the ideas themselves as a symptom of a disease. Riker attempts to validate this by relying on a barrage of health statistics.
Let's look at the stats he claims prove this woke mind virus.
He cites NIH data, allegedly showing that far-left activists are 500% more likely to take SSRIs antidepressants than political moderates or conservatives.
He claims 78% of arrested Antifa members during the 2020 riots had active psychiatric prescriptions on their person at the time of arrest.
He points to research suggesting Gen Z liberals are 3 times more likely to report clinical depression and anxiety.
His conclusion from all this data: broken minds build broken ideologies.
He literally says, you cannot fix society by listening to people whose neurons are poisoned by ideological panic.
And who require chemical restraints just to get out of bed in the morning.
The clinical diagnosis he focuses on most heavily is borderline personality disorder, or BPD.
He cites a Mayo Clinic finding claiming that 68% of female social justice influencers exhibit severe BPD traits.
We need to define BPD to understand why he uses it.
Symptoms of borderline personality disorder include intense emotional volatility, a paralyzing fear of abandonment, and inability to regulate anger.
And a specific psychological defense mechanism called splitting.
He spends pages mapping this BPD splitting directly onto feminist and leftist politics.
I want to make sure we understand exactly what splitting looks like in practice.
Think of splitting like toddler logic. To a toddler, you are either the absolute greatest superhero in the world for giving them a cookie, or you are the absolute devil incarnate for taking away their iPad.
There's no middle ground, no nuance, no understanding that a good person can do a frustrating thing.
That is a perfect analogy. Splitting is black and white, hyper-emotional, binary thinking.
The person is idealized as perfect or devalued as totally evil.
Riker argues that modern political activism operates on that exact same toddler logic.
Activists view the world entirely through this disordered lens. You are either a pure, oppressed victim or an evil, irredeemable oppressor.
Men are either perfect, wallet-dispensing feminist allies or toxic, wife-beating ogres.
He claims that much of modern online activism is just clinical attention-seeking with a hashtag.
He gives this vivid example of a TikTok therapist who had a viral meltdown, screaming at a barista over what she called oppressive latte art.
And then filming herself crying in her car about the systemic violence of the coffee shop.
Riker frames this not as political speech, but as emotional terrorism masquerading as compassion.
And he views the digital public square as the ultimate enabler and amplifier of this pathology.
Which leads to his critique of big tech, which he refers to as a panopticon run by woke Stasi.
He is arguing that the internet, which in the 90s was supposed to be the ultimate decentralized free speech utopia, has been converted into a highly curated digital gulag.
He talks about the eerie uniformity of recommended content across platforms.
He details how YouTube allegedly suppresses conservative voices like Jordan Peterson while artificially boosting left-wing progressive content into the algorithm.
He brings up a cited 2018 Facebook leak showing that 95% of permanently deplatformed users were right-leaning.
He says this new digital gulag doesn't need physical barbed wire or armed guards, because the algorithms just demote your posts into the abyss.
He actually tested this himself. He claims he posted the simple phrase, "biological sex is real," on his timeline, and his algorithmic reach dropped 98% overnight.
While violent left-wing hashtags promoting riots trended globally.
He extends this fear far beyond social media algorithms and into the future of human knowledge itself. Artificial intelligence.
Riker is terrified of AI guardrails.
The safety programming put into large language models like ChatGPT or Google's Gemini.
He views these not as corporate safety features to prevent the AI from generating hate speech, but as doctrinal filters.
Designed to scrub reality itself until only the progressive victimhood narrative remains.
He leans heavily into the famous incident from early 2024 where Google's Gemini AI fundamentally refused to generate images of white founding fathers or white popes,
but instead generated historically inaccurate, diverse, Black and Asian Nazis.
For Riker, this wasn't a coding glitch. It was the system working exactly as intended.
It was the AI actively erasing objective history to fit an equity matrix.
He calls the AI a blue-haired commissar reporting your wrongthink to HR.
It's the ultimate fusion of corporate monopoly power, technological control, and what he views as maternal woke censorship.
If we follow Riker's logic to its conclusion, if the historical institutions are captured by Marxists, the biological imperatives are weaponized against men, the educational systems are actively producing incompetence, and the digital world is a heavily censored algorithmic gulag, what is the way out?
How does his audience survive this?
This brings us to the final and perhaps most revealing section of the book. Riker's solutions for reclaiming what he calls the Western Dawn.
This is where the book shifts from an exhaustive list of complaints into a literal field manual.
Riker outlines two main phases to his solution.
The first phase is immediate, tactical, localized advice, defunding and disengaging. He wants his readers to completely stop feeding the beast.
The tactical advice focuses on micro-rebellions and personal resistance. He tells his readers to audit their entire lives.
On a corporate level, he instructs them to flatly refuse to put pronouns in their email signatures.
He tells them to refuse to attend DEI corporate trainings, framing them as modern Maoist struggle sessions. designed to humiliate men.
Financially, he advises a total purge of ESG-linked investments from their retirement portfolios.
He really emphasizes the necessity of building parallel economies. The logic is, if big tech hates you, build your own tech.
He cites a fascinating example of this parallel economy in action, a Montana-based Freedom Phone co-op.
This company essentially stripped out all Google and Apple tracking software
Preloaded alternative, uncensorable social media apps.
and allegedly outsold the Google Pixel in several rural conservative counties.
He wants a complete divestment from mainstream corporate culture. When companies go woke, he wants his audience to ensure they go broke, just like they did with the Bud Light boycott.
But the defunding and boycotting is just the short-term defensive strategy.
The crux of his solution, the grand long-term game plan, is deeply tied to his earlier views on evolutionary biology and demographics.
He calls it the demographic solution.
And the rallying cry he gives his readers here is incredibly stark. Outbreed the sterile.
Outbreed the sterile. It is a brutal Darwinian summary of his entire worldview.
Ricker looks at the rapidly falling birth rates among progressive, career-oriented women.
He cites statistics claiming that liberal women abort at 5 times the rate of conservative women.
He points to countries that have heavily adopted feminist, egalitarian policies like South Korea, which currently has a catastrophic 0.72 fertility rate, far below replacement level, and calls them demographic winters.
His ultimate solution for the red-pilled man is not to vote harder, but to embrace extreme traditionalism.
He provides very specific, almost militant lifestyle directives for his audience.
He tells young men to marry young. Do not wait for career establishment. Do not wait until you have a house.
Start building the traditional family unit immediately.
He commands them to have 4 kids. He specifically mentions the number 4 to ensure massive population growth beyond the standard replacement level of 2.1.
But it's not just about having the kids, it's about how you insulate them from the culture.
He warns that if you have 4 kids and send them to public school, you are just feeding troops to the enemy.
So he instructs his readers to pull their kids out of the education gulags. He mandates homeschooling.
But not just any homeschooling. He wants parents to completely abandon modern pedagogy and return to classical education models.
Specifically, he demands they use Aristotle's Organon and the Trivium. I had to look up the Trivium. It consists of 3 foundational phases of learning: grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
Why is he so obsessed with ancient Greek educational models?
The emphasis on the Trivium is the intellectual cornerstone of his resistance.
Remember, Riker believes that the progressive left wins its cultural battles entirely through emotional manipulation, pathologized empathy, and linguistic sleight of hand.
The verbal shivs we discussed earlier, like redefining tolerance or weaponizing the word toxic.
The Trivium is designed to counter exactly that. By teaching children rigorous grammar, formal logic, and the art of debate rhetoric, he believes he is arming them with impenetrable intellectual weapons.
They will be able to instantly dissect and dismantle ideological word games.
He paints this incredibly vivid contrasting picture of the future. On one side, he sees feminists chasing empty corporate titles, freezing their eggs, and taking SSRIs in lonely apartments.
On the other side, he sees his readers raising a massive growing army of logic-wielding, scripture-quoting civilization builders.
In his view, the future inherently belongs to the fertile.
If the left is literally aborting their future and sterilizing their youth through gender ideology, Riker argues the right simply needs to build large traditional families, teach them how to think critically, and simply wait the left out until their ideology collapses under its own demographic weight.
It is a sweeping, intensely ideological conclusion to a deeply combative book.
As we summarize this exploration, it is vital to reiterate that the rhetoric in Feminist Madness, Zombie Cancer on Truth is incredibly hostile, intentionally provocative, and highly polarizing.
Riker uses inflammatory language, selective statistics, and aggressive biological essentialism to construct his worldview.
Absolutely. The tone is aggressive from page 1. But regardless of how you feel about his claims, whether you find his theories abhorrent, entirely accurate, or somewhere in between, understanding this specific framework is absolutely crucial for anyone trying to comprehend the extreme, red-pilled corners of the modern culture war.
This book codifies a very real, very deep-seated distrust of modern institutions.
It explains exactly why a certain demographic views HR departments not as annoying bureaucracy, but as enemy combatants.
It explains why they view diversity initiatives as literal theft.
and why they view the modern culture war not as a polite disagreement over tax policy, but as a visceral biological struggle for civilizational survival.
It provides the vernacular and the theoretical scaffolding for a massive, growing online subculture. By understanding the architecture of Riker's arguments, you understand the architecture of the manosphere's worldview.
And that leaves us with a profound, overarching question that builds directly on the source material we've explored today. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Throughout this entire book, Riker argues relentlessly that our modern political divides are not just disagreements about philosophy, governance, or economics.
He claims they are ultimately driven by deeply incompatible biological imperatives and hardwired neurochemistry.
He pits the supposed feminine instinct for safety, coddling, and empathy against the supposed masculine instinct for merit, risk, and hierarchy.
So, the question is this. If our political differences are truly rooted in our biology and our underlying psychology, as this book vehemently suggests, is political consensus in a diverse society even myologically possible?
Or, if we accept Riker's premise, are we destined to just endlessly battle over whose biological instincts get codified into law?
It is a grim, highly deterministic view of human nature, but it is the logical endpoint of his entire thesis.
That is definitely something heavy to chew on.
And with that, we wrap up this massive discussion. Let me remind you one more time. If you found this exploration intriguing and you want to read the book for yourself to see how the author weaves all these disparate threads together into his unified theory, go check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the ebook Feminist Madness, Zombie Cancer on Truth.
And if you want to follow the author's ongoing commentary and updates, you can find him at Substack, under the handle at Conrad Riker.
Finally, please give us a like and subscribe to the show so you can catch our next deep dive into the ideas shaping our world. Thanks for sticking with us through this intense exploration, and we will see you next time.